I'm Cat Oriel, a reporter with Forbes Breaking News. Today I'm here with Ashwin Ramaswami, who's running for Georgia State Senate in District 48. Ashwin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kat.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure thing. So I'm Ashwin. I grew up in Johns Creek, Georgia, which is in this district. I'm the child of immigrants. I was born, raised, and educated in the district in public schools. And I decided to run because I wanted to make sure that others would have the same opportunities as I had. After growing up in a district, I was able to go to amazing education. I was able to go to Stanford and also Georgetown for law. I was able to work on election security, cybersecurity work, and I just want to give back to my community. I think recently we've seen folks in the state have been cutting down on essential services, investment in things like education. And we're also seeing folks who are trying to undermine democracy. So my goal with coming back and running is that I really wanted to make sure we have a voice for the folks who are able to make sure that we're able to have a robust democratic institutions, but also the kinds of support and investment we need for the future of our communities.
So I did read a little bit about your background and your resume and everything that you've studied. So how did you go from computer science to law and then from law school to where you are today? Did you always know that you wanted to go into politics, or is it just something that you were recently inspired to do?
I think I was always interested in the news and see what was going on. I've always been from a very young age, I've been a technologist. I'm one of those people from a very young age. I used to code for fun when I'm back in school. So I studied computer science, but I soon realized that working at a tech company wasn't really for me. I really wanted to do something where there was a bigger need for someone with my kind of skill set, which is why I ended up doing law school, ended up working in the federal government in cybersecurity. And there I really felt like my work had a bigger mission and purpose. So that's why I decided to go that route. And it was really after January 6th and the people trying to overturn the election, which made me really think about going into politics, because I realized that you may have the most talented people in government working on policy, but if the politicians are supposed to back them up, if they just go and undermine their work by spreading lies about what they did, we can't do our work properly. So that's when I decided to be a voice and enter politics in that way.
Well, speaking about January 6th and the 2020 election, your competitor, current State Senator Shawn Still, has been indicted in Fulton County along with President Trump and more than a dozen others for their participation in a fake electors plot. So what has it felt like on the ground in Georgia, especially with the trial that I just mentioned and also Rudy Giuliani, his defamation trial? Do you feel like voters feel empowered or, hopeless about the election security in that country and in the state in general?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think we have really dedicated civil servants who are working to keep our elections secure, whether it's at the state level or in the federal level. And I think the problem is that when you have people like Giuliani coming and undermining that work by spreading falsehoods, saying that, oh, this isn't secure. So I think voters are, I think that does cause a bit of confusion and also a bit of, it's like government can't work for me because even if they do the right thing, other politicians come and try to undermine that work. So I think that's definitely something I would want to work on, is making sure that we do respect the work of the civil servants, of the people who know actually how election security works, and not just say things because it's politically expedient. But also note though, like a lot of voters, I think democracy is really important, but in addition, there's so many other issues that our democracy deals with. For example, issues like healthcare, investing in education, and I think all of these issues also are really important to voters as well. So we should make sure, I think, we're not only safeguarding our democracy, but we are also addressing the biggest problems that are facing voters today.
Yeah, and besides the lawsuit around the election, what are the other qualities and the issues that you feel like the state senator that you're running against, Senator Still, what do you think he has or hasn't done on these issues that makes him unfit to continue serving in the position?
Yeah, I think one big thing, if you look at Georgia right now, we have a $11 billion surplus in terms of budget. That's billion with a B. What that means is that we've been, under a GOP controlled legislature. It's just been budget cuts after budget cuts, where we're not paying our civil servants enough, so we can't retain that kind of talent. We're not investing in transportation, healthcare, expanding Medicaid, or even like paying our teachers more. As the state is growing and getting more investment, we're not having a commensurate amount of state investment to actually make that, to keep up with that. And I think Shawn Still he's not shown any interest in doing those kinds of investments. He's just been going along with what the party tells him. And I understand fiscal conservatism. It's always good to save money, but at some point we're paying taxes to the state, and the state has to invest that back in our futures. So I think that's one big thing which makes him unfit for office. We need people who actually look to the future and don't just look to talking points from their party in terms of how we can invest in Georgians.
Mm-hmm. And what would your other legislative priorities be if you were to be elected?
Yeah, I think one big priority would be expanding Medicaid. We want to make sure that those who can't afford healthcare are able to get the healthcare they need. And this is something where if we do it, we would be able to get a lot of federal money coming into Georgia. It's something where Republicans have obstinately refused to do because they don't want to work with people in the White House. But I think if you have money that you're able to use to help others, we should take it. I would also support additional funding of public schools, education. We need to make sure we pay our teachers a livable wage. Teachers are the reason why our communities are so strong in terms of people are able to get jobs, do things like that. But we need to make sure we're paying them more. And I think what we're seeing now is funding is being potentially diverted over to private schools, and the job of the state for public schools is to make sure we have an education that works for all. So that would be one other area for me as well. And finally, it would be protecting reproductive rights as well. We need to make sure Georgia does not go backwards on those kinds of issues, and that we do preserve those rights for everyone as well.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel like Democrats on a national level have been doing in championing all of those issues that you care about and that you've laid out?
Yeah, so I think the good work is being done at the federal level. So if you look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, there have been many investments which can bring additional jobs, have a better economy, more investments in really important parts of our future. And some of this money has been coming to Georgia. But I would say we need to, first of all, make sure we're well positioned to accept that money and investment in our futures, such as transportation or manufacturing and things like that. But there's also work that we should be doing at the state level, which can't necessarily be done at the federal level. For example, expanding access to Medicaid is something we can do only at the state level, and we need to do that. And additional, other things around reproductive rights, public safety, funding of schools, all these things we need to make sure Georgia does. So the federal government can only do so much. We have to play our part in terms of what we're willing to support.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you could see yourself having long-term ambitions to, represent Georgia on a federal level, or do you feel like you want to do something else rather than stay in politics for the rest of your career?
I think for this particular race, the impetus which made me jump in was looking at what's already there, Shawn Still, and how we need people with integrity in public office. And my goal is, if elected, to serve Georgians and to see how best to serve Georgians in the future. And at the moment, I think a lot of that work needs to be done at the state level, and I'm committed to make sure I do that work first.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to go back a little bit to talk about your focus on election security. So I know that's what your focus was when you studied computer science. So can you talk to me a little bit about why you decided to do that? Was it because you're from Georgia and, Georgia's always been in the forefront of championing voters' rights, or what inspired you to study that?
Yeah, so I would say, when I studied computer science, I was more broadly working on web development, cybersecurity as well. I think what got me really interested in it was initially taking a tech ethics class over at Stanford, where we learned about, the fact that when you're building code and stuff, just like building a startup making a lot of money, there's so many implications in terms of what you build and what you build it for. So people need to be careful in terms of what technology you build and how it's deployed. So that's where I got more interested in learning about the whole government tech scene, where there's a lot of technology that the government builds or needs to build, and whether it's built well or not really affects the lives of millions of Americans. Look at, for example, healthcare.gov and how initially wasn't very well, and then eventually it became much better. So that all of that made me interested in working for the government. And I started working in the government in 2020 on cybersecurity, and that was one of the biggest issues that the agency was working on. So I worked at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, C-I-S-A. And yeah, at the time, that was a huge issue because people realized that, in 2016, there were all these questions around election security, and thinking about how do we make sure we really secure our elections and help states to do so. So that's kind of what made me interested in it. It was the topic that needed the most help. There were only a handful of people at the federal level working on it. It was just starting up then, so it was a great time to get involved at that time.
I'm just curious, in your work at CISA, it has been a lot of controversy, I would say, around the agency from conservatives when it comes to censorship. I'm just curious if you have heard any of those criticisms and what you would say to people who have doubts about the agency's legitimacy.
Yeah, I would say if you look at CISA's mission, right? CISA's mission is to protect the resiliency of our critical infrastructure and also cybersecurity. So what that means is that sectors like defense, health, manufacturing, elections as well. And it's really about forming these partnerships and sharing information with both public and private partners to make sure that our nation CISA has been doing. That's their mission. And everything they've been doing has been to that aim. How do we share information? That's what CISA has been working on. If others want to politicize that work, that's unfortunate. But this work is really important. It's nonpartisan. It's done by dedicated civil servants, and we need more of it. In fact, CISA was actually created under President Trump in 2018. And when I was at CISA, I worked under both President Trump and President Biden. It's unfortunate that when President Trump, after he lost the election, he decided to start criticizing CISA's work. But we need, I think, politicians who are more dedicated to integrity and look at the work for what it really is, not just when it suits them or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, my last question for you is that if you were to win, your win would be in many ways a first for the Georgia State Senate, and particularly you would be the first Gen Z member of the Georgia State Senate. So what do you say to people who say you're too young or you're underqualified for this role?
Yeah, well, I would say if you look at the history of our country, many of the people at the founding fathers' time were in their 20s. It's not unprecedented to have people who are young and involved in politics. And in fact, the fact that there aren't that many people who are Gen Z shows that we need more people who can bring those voices to the table. We can't just have the same people who have been around for decades and decades. We really need new voices to be brought to the table. That's how we can really focus on the issues that matter to us most. It's just because you're young doesn't mean you don't have experience. And being a fresh voice to the table means that you're able to really listen to people more. And that's really important, I believe, in politics.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kat.